welcome back to Capitol Review. The presidential election less than 100 days away, and it's generating a buzz on social media and a lot of conversations at the workplace and in homes. And joining us now is Dr. Joel A. Davis Brown, the founder of Numis LLC, an organizational consulting firm. Dr. Brown, thank you for joining us and welcome to Capitol Review.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Well, we know the current political climate, Dr. Brown, is divisive, and the race for the White House is certainly a big part of the discussion. How should people approach it in the workplace? Some say you should avoid talking politics and religion at work, but that just seems to be tough to do these days.
Yeah, I don't really think that's the solution. So my grandfather once had a saying, what you resist persists. And so I think rather than having a kind of a blanket or general policy saying that you can't talk about politics, I think what companies and organizations should be striving and thinking about is how can we create greater belonging, knowing that just because people have checked into work from 9 to 5, that people are still going to be affected by what's happening in the political landscape. So what that means is not necessarily saying let's have an open forum or discussion about what's happening in the political race, but making sure that there's time and space for people to talk about how they're affected, and also reinforcing norms around respect and collegiality during the rest of this year, and I would say for the foreseeable future.
What about at home? Should the same rules apply? It's not uncommon, as you know, for family members to have strong differences.
Well, I always would say to anyone, it depends on what type of relationship that you want to have, and it depends on two things. Number one, the type of conversation and connection that you want to build with the people who are closest to you, and whether you have psychological safety. Politics is really a forecaster, a predictor, and a symbol of your deeper values. And I think there should always be a conversation with people who you're close to talk about what's important to you. If, however, you can't do that and maintain psychological safety, then I think you have to take steps and measures to make sure that your personhood, your mental and spiritual well-being is protected. And so that may mean not having conversations. It may mean that you don't spend as much time with people. The only problem with that is some of the people that you may neglect or may decide to not spend time with the people who you share a blood relationship with. So that may prove to be very difficult. So I think at the end of the day, what we want to do is be able to honor differences and to listen to where people are coming from, and to do so in a way that is respectful in tone and in behavior, and setting up norms where people can feel like they can share things if there is that requisite level of psychological safety.
Dr. Brown, let's talk about close friendships. We've seen politics either put a strain on friendships or even ruin them. How should longtime friends maybe approach the discussion?
That's an interesting question, because I've actually had to contend with that very issue myself. And I think, again, talking about politics and talking about one's social values is a way of bringing people closer and a way of clarifying certain things. In some instances, people may find, as we find with any relationship, that maybe the relationship has run its course. The question is, what I ask people is, what do you want to get out of the interaction? Are you wanting to build understanding? Are you trying to prove a point? Because most times, if you're simply arguing just to get your point across, that's never going to be successful. But if you can do so and remember that the point of having these conversations should be to build greater awareness, to share information, to help support each other, and to perhaps expand one's worldview, then I think in that sense, having conversations can be very helpful. But if it's just blood sport where people are having conversations because they want to tell someone they're wrong, they want to prove a point, they're trying to win an argument, that's the wrong energy to bring to these conversations, and I think that can harm your relationship or possibly end it.
And navigating social media, you know, that can really turn up the intensity. Can you have a meaningful interaction on social media?
That's a wonderful question. I find that you can if you set boundaries, and if you make sure that people, again, understand what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. However, effective forum to exchange ideas, to talk about information, and to deconstruct some of the ideas and some of the beliefs that are out there. So if it's something where you really want to have a conversation, I think you can do so where you're engaging with someone one-on-one, you can see the person, you can honor their humanity. When you're on social media, that person's just a profile. They may not even be a real person, so it's hard to remember that you're talking to another individual. So I try to make sure that those conversations are reserved for offline, and if I do have a conversation with someone, I set my boundaries and I make sure that I and they observe them.
Dr. Joel A. Davis Brown, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, it's my pleasure.